of the committee today. So welcome back to Commerce Committee, sir. Also, I have asked Representative Rogers or Chairman Rogers to join us today. He will be sitting on the committee. He may interact, but if he will not vote. I felt it important to make sure that the chairman of the Ag Committee was with us today to weigh in and ask any questions that he might have. And so he's joining us today as well. With that, and I guess Keon and Gabriel we've got two audiovisual people today training. So welcome to Commerce Committee. Let's go ahead and get started. The only item on the agenda today is a hearing on HB 2766, and Revisor Hamilton will go through that with us.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. House Bill 2766 would create the Kansas Land and Military Installation Protection Act to prohibit foreign principals from countries of concern from holding any interest in certain real property in this state. We'll start by jumping actually down to page 4, line 13, where one of the main restrictions in the bill is laid out in new section 3, subsection A. That would state that no foreign principal shall directly or indirectly own or acquire any interest in any real property located within 150 miles of the boundary of any military installation located in this state or any adjacent state except a de minimis interest. So I'm going to go ahead and slow it down a little bit, and we'll go through some of these key definitions. So no foreign principal, you can see that definition on page 3, lines 1 through 16, and it's split into 6 different paragraphs. And each of those paragraphs reference countries of concern. So to understand what a foreign principal is, let's actually just take a quick detour to the definition of country of concern, which is on page 1, line 32, means the following: People's Republic of China, including the Hong Kong Special Administrative Region, Republic of Cuba, Islamic Republic of Iran, Democratic People's Republic of Korea, Russian Federation, and Bolivarian Republic of Venezuela. Country of concern does not include Taiwan. So jumping back to the definition of foreign principal, that term would mean the government or any official of the government of a country of concern, 2, any political party, subdivision thereof, or any member of a political party of a country of concern, 3, any corporation, partnership, association, organization, or under other combination of persons organized under the laws of or having its principal place of business in a country of concern. The term would also include any subsidiary owned or wholly controlled by such entity. 4, it would include any agent of or any entity otherwise under the control of a country of concern. 5, any individual whose residence is in a country of concern and who is not a citizen or lawful permanent resident of the United States. Or 6, any individual, entity, or combination thereof described in paragraphs 1 through 5 that has a controlling interest in any company formed for the purpose of holding any interest in real property. So that brings us to a second very important term, interest in real property. That term is defined on page 3, line 17 through 26. It would mean 1, ownership interest in any parcel of real property acquired by purchase, gift, grant, device, bequest, or other transfer of such interest. 2, ownership or other interest in any easement or other right of egress onto or across any parcel of real property. 3, ownership or other interest in any right to any oil, gas, minerals, or water located on or under any parcel of real property. And 4, any interest or right to possess or use any parcel of real property acquired by the execution of a lease purchase, or any other form of rental agreement. So we're talking about ownership, easements, and rental agreements. Next key term is real property. Real property means any real estate located in the state except residential real property. And then residential real property is defined to mean any real property that is used exclusively as a place of residence for human habitation. A next important term, military installation, means any land, buildings, or other structures owned or controlled by any division of the United States Department of Defense, Kansas National Guard, or any other federal or state agency that is critical to the safety and security of Kansas or the United States. So let's read that first big paragraph again in new section 3A. So it states that no foreign principal shall directly or indirectly own or acquire any interest in any real property located within 150 miles of the boundary of any military installation located in the state or any adjacent state. So you have to think about the Missouris, Oklahomas, et cetera, except a de minimis interest in such real property. And then let's move along to page 4, starting in line 18, where the bill states that any foreign principal that directly or indirectly owns or acquires any interest in real property would be required to file registration of such interest with the Attorney General not later than 90 days after July 1st, 2024, or the date such interest is acquired, whichever is later. The foreign principal would be required to divest from such registered real property not later than 360 days after July 1st, 2024, or the date the interest is acquired, whichever is later. A copy of all documentation evidencing the divestiture would need to be submitted to the Attorney General not later than 30 days after the effective date of the divestiture. In the case that a foreign principal acquires an interest in real property by device or bequest, through the enforcement of any security interest, or through the collection of a debt, their property would still need to be registered and divested in accordance with Section 3. Moving along to new Section 4, that's on page 5, line 3. Any person could report a suspected violation of Section 3 to the Attorney General. The Attorney General would then be required to investigate any report that the AG reasonably suspects to constitute a violation of Section 3. Upon finding a violation of that section, the AG would commence an action in a court of competent jurisdiction to enforce the provisions of Section 3. The Attorney General could seek, 1, a court order directing the defendant to divest such defendant's interest in such real property, 2, injunctive relief, 3, civil forfeiture of the defendant's interest in such real property, and 4, reasonable attorney fees and court costs. And then moving to new section 5 on page 5, line 18. This section is pretty short, but it constitutes the bill's second main restriction on foreign principals. It would state that no foreign principal shall receive any direct benefit related to any economic development program, regardless of the form of such benefit. And the term economic development program, that's defined on page 2, lines 22 through 41. It's rather lengthy, but the last paragraph of that definition is sort of a catch-all for economic programs. It states any other economic development incentive program that provides any form of tax credit, abatement, or exemption or financial assistance provided by or authorized by a governmental entity. New section 6 of the bill would require and authorize the Attorney General to take various actions concerning non-notified transactions. That term, non-notified transactions, is defined on page 3 of the bill, lines 32 through 35. It means any transaction involving foreign investment in the United States that is not voluntarily submitted to the Committee on Foreign Investment in the United States for review pursuant to federal law. And in my bill brief, which might be online, I also included a link to a Congressional Research Service memo that just very briefly describes that committee in more detail and what their duties are. But under new Section 6, the actions required by the Attorney General would include preparing and submitting a report on any identified non-notified transactions to the Committee on Foreign Investment in the United States, preparing and submitting a report to various state entities, retaining copies of documents that are part of the aforementioned reports, and on or before January 1, 2025, adopting rules and regulations to implement the provisions of Section 6. New Section 7 on page 5, line 42, contains our severability clause. And then Section 8, that amends KSA 604104. That statute concerns offenses and conduct giving rise to forfeiture. The statute would be amended on page 7, line 39, to add violation of the Kansas Land and Military Installation Protection Act to the list of offenses and conduct that can give rise to forfeiture. HB 2766 would become effective upon publication in the statute book. And with that, I'd be happy to take any preliminary questions.
All right, thank you. Great job. Any questions? Representative Shu.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Kyle. I had a question, page 3, lines 24 through 26, the definition of interest in real property. Did you say that that includes essentially all forms of rental agreements?
Just one moment as I find that language. So real property is defined further down on line 36, and then residential real property. Let's see.
No, the question was about interest in real property, and so I'm just saying,
right.
Does it include rental? Like essentially, all rental agreements are included.
Right. So that's paragraph 4 of that definition. There on line 24. Any interest, any other form of rental agreement. That's how that provision ends.
So, if a recent Chinese immigrant wanted to open up like a Chinese restaurant in an area and they're leasing that property to open up the restaurant, they would not be able to open up that restaurant within 150 miles of a military installation?
Likely not, because that property would not be used just for residential purposes.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chair.
Representative Crawford.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. But also on that same line, though, it states if they're here legally, correct? Then they could enter into that.
There is exemption language for permanent residents and citizens of the United States.
Representative Shu.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I would say a lot of Chinese restaurants are probably opened by people who don't actively have their green card. They're probably in the process, but they probably don't actively have their green card.
Representative Clayton.
Thank you. So I have 2 questions about 2 different sections. So one of them talking about military installations. Does NBAF count?
I would circle back to you about particular examples. It could be interpreted as somewhat a broad definition.
All right. And then my second question is about the definition of countries of concern. So if you pull up the State Department's list of countries of particular concern, they actually have more on that list than we have on our list. When was the last time that was updated by the state? And could countries of particular concern, do they get added by us? And if so, when? Because at first I just thought we were following what the State Department listed, but if that was the case, then we would be exactly the same, and we're not. So tell me how that list works. Who decides and when and under what circumstances?
I don't immediately recall the what's on the federal list, but for the purposes of this bill, it would be up to the state legislature to update it as it does the provisions of any bill.
Okay, so like theoretically, if people got mad at Canada, it could be added to that list. Like literally any country could be added by the legislature.
It would be the discretion of the Kansas legislature to add different countries to this list.
Thank you.
Yep.
Okay, so I had a question on that too. So there's nothing in here that would allow, like, say the attorney general decided or the governor at the time decides there might be some issues with a certain country, it would have to still go through the legislature. There's no way to at least temporarily add somebody to that list until the legislature can meet.
Not to my understanding, it would likely require an amendment by the legislature, a future legislature.
Okay, thank you. Representative Williams.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So would there be anything in this bill about retroactivity? So for example, if a county or another entity went into an agreement with a foreign entity that was identified, would that be null and void upon the passage? How would that work?
The language in the bill states a foreign principal that owns, as in currently, or acquires. And so July 1, 2024, the clock would start ticking where foreign principals would need to register with the AG's office, including those that currently own land here in the state.
So they would have to register, but if they already had an agreement and were moving forward, would that still be valid for them to be within this restricted area?
From what I understand from the bill's language, upon registering, then a subsequent clock begins where they must divest themselves from that property.
Okay, thank you.
Committee, any further questions for the reviser on the bill? Representative Probst.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Kyle, I'm looking at the section on foreign principal and the definitions on that. And I just like to make sure I understand, is when I look at that list, are these all things that independently meet the definition of foreign principal, or is there another qualifier here or elsewhere in the bill that, I mean, I'm looking at like the government means the government or any official of government, and then political party, subdivision of any member of a political party. And it goes through a number of those, but I'm trying to figure out if this is like tied to anything else also. I mean, I assume we're talking about somebody who's not a resident, but I guess I'm trying to make sure I fully understand the definition of foreign principal.
Outside of the initial exception language in section 3 that talks about the de minimis interest, which is defined, what constitutes a foreign principal is contained within those 6 paragraphs. And this paragraph 6, illustrates it can be any combination of the before mentioned entities. And again, it does rely on that definition of foreign or country of concern. But other than that, I'm not aware of it relying on an outside source.
Okay, thank you.
Committee, any further questions on the bill for the reviser? All right, seeing none. Thank you very much. Appreciate it. All right, committee, we're going to take Attorney General Kobach's testimony first because he's got to leave us. And so he's neutral, in person. Welcome to Commerce Committee, General.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, members of the committee, for allowing us to deviate from protocol and go with neutral testimony first. I do have a hard out at the top of the hour, so I'd hoped I'd be able to stick around for questions, but obviously the preliminary things went a little bit longer. And forgive me if I speak rather quickly. You've got my full written testimony. I just want to start. I'm testifying neutral because I'm very encouraged by Majority Leader Crofts bringing this bill forward and this committee's willingness to address this issue, which threatens our military security, economic security, food supply, and many other aspects of our security in Kansas. But I do have some concerns about the structure of it and suggestions for amendment. And I hope you will consider those suggestions when you work this bill, because I think we want to get it right. This is one of those big issues that you're probably not going to address year after year. You're going to want to get it right the first time. So let me give you a couple of statistics really quickly, and then go into some of those aspects where I think it could be improved. Statistics. According to USDA records, foreign nationals own 43.4 million acres of U.S. Agricultural land. That's about the size of the state of Missouri. Percentage-wise, that's 3.4% of ag land. The number is growing rapidly. Just in the last year that we had records, it increased 8% in a single year. That was in 2022. And you have to remember that the Department of Agriculture's numbers understate the issue because it's based on self-reporting. So the actual number is larger. We don't know how much larger. China is not the largest owner of foreign land. Canada is. However, China's share is growing, I believe, faster than any other country's share. From 2010 to 2021, the dollar value of Chinese-owned farmland that we know of increased over 20-fold in an 11-year period. So really an extraordinary growth in that particular country's share. I should also note that it's not just China that poses a security threat. It's also Mexican drug cartels. They and their agents and proxies have purchased a huge amount of rural land in Texas and Oklahoma already, using them for all kinds of purposes, as safe houses, as I'll get into some of the examples a little bit later. But suffice it to say, it's not just China. There are other countries and other entities that pose a threat. Most of our neighboring states, Nebraska, Iowa, South Dakota, North Dakota, Arkansas, and Missouri, all have restrictions or complete bans on foreign land purchases. Kansas is the only one in the breadbasket that does not. So it's kind of open season on Kansas ag land. During the 2023 legislative session, 11 states adopted restrictions on foreign ownership and purchasing of land. And I won't go into the list of the 11, but basically there are two models. The ones that the states near us have, which are Nebraska, Iowa, and then Idaho most recently, not that they're near us, they have one that completely bans all foreign nationals from purchasing and foreign entities, corporations from purchasing ag land in their states. There's a different model which Missouri and Florida have. Florida just adopted theirs, and that's like this bill. It lists 6 or 7 countries, depending on whether they follow the State Department's list exactly or not, and say entities from these countries cannot purchase the land. I prefer the model that has a broader prohibition like that in Senate Bill 446, which is kind of the companion bill to this, a little bit different. And then it allows the state land council to grant exceptions to ones that don't pose any threat. So the first point I would note is that it's a legal concern. There is a challenge to the Florida law. It went from federal district court up to the 11th Circuit. Now it's back down to federal district court, challenged the legality of that one based on the Equal Protection Clause, arguing that it's national origin discrimination if you're singling out people from certain countries. They also have a preemption challenge based on the idea that only the State Department gets to decide which countries pose a concern. I'm not raising this because I think Florida's going to lose. I think, however, these are not trivial arguments, and you should be aware of that. Whereas if you make a blanket ban like Nebraska and Iowa have done, those arguments go away. And in fact, the United States Supreme Court said in a case that I quote on page, I think 3 of my testimony, each state, in the absence of any treaty provisions to the contrary, has the power to deny aliens the right to own land within its borders. Let me jump to the practical questions. Excuse me for looking at my watch. So the practical questions with the way the bill is structured now and how I think it could be improved. HB 2766 focuses on these 6 problematic nations that pose a threat to the United States. But the first problem is that the Chinese can easily circumvent this if you only focus on 6 countries. That's because the CCP operates through shell companies in many countries that they have purchased allegiance with. And when I say purchased allegiance, I mean purchased it with money. Through the Belt and Road Initiative, I'm sure you've heard about that. The Chinese have spent over $1 trillion in 147 different countries, putting all kinds of infrastructure in. It's a huge gift to these mostly developing countries. And when they give that gift, suddenly the allegiances shift to China. So in 2023, for example, you might have heard about this in the news, they gave a massive gift to Honduras. Honduras, which had previously taken the pro-Taiwan position on that particular issue, switched 180 degrees, right after receiving the gift. And now Honduras is taking the pro-CCP position on that issue. I mention this to say that they have so many allegiances and proxy states and vassal states that it would be no trouble at all for a company in Vietnam or a company in Honduras to purchase the property when it's actually controlled by the CCP. Second objection, I'm just going to proceed quickly, and again, these could all be improved with amendments, is that there's no way for the Attorney General's office to easily determine the specific controlling ownership of a company that's not a U.S. company. We can determine if a company is a U.S. company because we look in all 50 states, Secretary of State's office, and see if it's been registered in any of the 50 states. But once we know that it's not a U.S. company, then it's just a black box out there. We don't know where it comes from unless they are advertising and telling us, yes, we are a company based in France and our ownership is half of CCP, the People's Republic of China. So there's no database. There's no easy way for the KBI to suddenly start researching every entity that is discovered not to be a U.S. registered entity. Third quibble, and again, this could be easily amended, is the problem with Mexican drug cartels. They're not a nation state, and Mexico is not one of the nation states in that list of 6. They use these properties, as I mentioned, and they're typically in rural areas, safe houses, drug trafficking, drop locations, human trafficking, drop locations, and for manufacturing the drugs, as in pressing the fentanyl into pills. In Texas and Oklahoma, the cartels I mentioned have been purchasing a lot. In 2012, federal agents raided a horse ranch in South Oklahoma. They found that it was a front for the Los Zetos drug cartel to launder U.S. dollars, processed through illegal drug transactions. Right now, there are 14 Kansas counties that are designated as high-intensity drug trafficking areas by the U.S. Drug Enforcement Agency. Those would be likely counties that the cartels might seek to purchase property in. They may already have done so. The best solution, again, is to make a blanket ban and then have entities that want to have a waiver or an exception come to the Kansas Land Council, which would have representatives from the Fusion Center, from the KBI, and they would make their case. No, we present no threat. We're not affiliated with the cartel. And that allows the KBI and the Fusion Center to direct their investigations at specific targets instead of looking at the entire world and having very little specific information to go on. One last thing I would consider amending, and one of the members of the committee asked a question about this, and that is businesses owned by foreign nationals. I think there certainly are many Chinese, Iranian, Russian refugees who are averse to those governments and who would be able to live in Kansas with this bill, but they, I would think we would want them to purchase a business, build a business. And so I think you do have that issue where the businesses, you might want to consider allowing that. Senate Bill 446 does make allowance for business ownership of less than 3 acres by these foreign nationals. And I really apologize that I'm not going to be able to take questions. Normally, as many of you know, I like to go back and forth on these questions, but I've really got to run. So thank you so much. Take care.
Thank you, General. General, I would hope you would come back because this won't be the last bite at this apple. And so we'd like to have you come back. Thank you, sir. All right, we'll move on to proponents. And we'll start with Majority Leader Croft. I'm sure. Welcome back to Commerce, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Again, thank you, Mr. Chair. Thanks to the committee for holding this hearing and going through this process. I looked at this thing as I was going through it, and again, what I want to first say is I want to thank everybody that's out here that's been engaged in this process and everybody on the committee for all your input into this. This is nowhere near where we started, and that's because of all of your engagement, so I want to thank you for that. When I was going through this thing and trying to figure out why I decided to look back and kind of reflect the fact that I spent 30 years, as you guys know, in the military, but it was something specific for me, and I know there's others in here that have had this. But in the mid-90s, I remember being in a conversation in the Pentagon, having a discussion about, and I was on the back row, just so we're clear. I was not part of that discussion other than listening. About the balance between globalization and national security. And do we maintain manufacturing? Do we maintain certain things in the United States? Or do we go in all in on the globalization? The decision was made, not just there, but all the way up and down the chain, to go with the globalization. It has been a good thing as we've gone through things, but at some point, it has tipped in the direction where national security has become an issue. And you're going to hear more and more about all the different violations, the other different engagements from these foreign adversaries. And I just think it's important for us to make sure we address those national security concerns right now. We are at that point in time. In fact, I would argue that maybe we're several years behind that point, and we need to really look at this thing. And so I appreciate the opportunity to have this discussion. At the end, I will talk about how this bill is one of several bills out there, and many of them will come to this committee. In this bill, and again, I apologize, I'm trying to make sure I can read what's here. I'm really having a hard time. In a lot of the discussions, I want to thank Chairman Rogers, who we sat down and talked. And I know last year this bill was in the Ag Committee, and it felt like it was a complete attack on the Ag community. And that was never the intent of this process. At least I didn't want that to be our intent, and hence why we expanded this from just agriculture to business, commercial, as well as residential. Now, as you guys know, as already referenced, and that was from a conversation I had with one of the committee members, that we decided to hold off on the residential aspect of this for this year and maybe for a long time. But we wanted to make sure we didn't make a mistake. People that are here following the American dream, we didn't want to attack that. We wanted to make sure we did this the right way. There is a bill in Florida, was already mentioned. It is in the court system. It's got similar language that we were thinking about, so we decided to hold off based off the input received from the group. And I do want to say, too, in talking with the Chairman Rogers, him talking to me and going through this doesn't, and he'll tell you later, doesn't mean he's in support of this exact bill. He has his opinions on those things, but we've come to a working where we are today. And I think today is also a forcing function of having us all talk about where we are in this position and see where we go from there. As we talked earlier, the foreign land ownership is it's up 30%. It's up 30% since 2019. And in this bill, we specifically focus about national security. That's the issue here, is about national security. Hence why there's nothing about acreages. There's nothing about any of this stuff other than proximity to military bases. And for the record, I actually came in at a lower number, and we went and approached the national security apparatus, if you will. And their answer was 150 is your minimum. We would like it to be more. They can talk for themselves on that, but that was the point, and that's how we drove to 150 miles around a military base. Again, mine would have been a little bit smaller, but they're the experts, and I want to go with what the experts had to say. One of the other things we haven't talked about in this bill, it also covers mineral rights and water rights. That's also part of this bill. I don't think there's another bill in the nation, maybe, except for maybe West Virginia, that's covering that, but not as detailed as we are. 15 other states have enacted this type of law, or trying to. We limited, as was mentioned earlier, about the federal list. There's actually two federal lists. There's the State Departments and the Commerce's, and we picked ours off of Commerce. And there is a little bit of difference from the Commerce list, and that is Venezuela, because in the Commerce list, Venezuela is still targeted as the government. And we decided to say, how do we decide if it's a government or somebody from the country? So we just went with the country of concern. And again, like I said, this covers all property, but it does exclude lawful permanent residents. And I would love to have more of that discussion as we talk about that population. Because actually, the state of Indiana called us just the other day because they're looking at some of ours having a very similar discussion. So I think it's very prudent that we do that. And I appreciate that. The other differences in here, when it was mentioned about proxies, that is a challenge. How do we get after the proxies? I believe that what we have in this bill, as it talks about ownership at any level of an organization, ownership where a foreign adversary has influential control, then I think we get after the proxy. I think that accomplishes that task, and I would actually love to have more of a conversation. But one thing that has come up in talking to the committee is the point about terror organizations. This one's a little bit more difficult because they change names all the time. So how could we come up with a list and who makes up that list and going through that process? That was in a conversation with a committee member, and I'm fully open to having that discussion about adding terrorist organizations to this list of places that we can engage in. Let's see, what else do we have here? I want to make sure I cover all the things. Oh, one of the other things was mentioned too by the Attorney General. He mentioned that he has a team that would meet beforehand. We had that discussion. We went through the process of whether we wanted to slow the process down for deciding on land. We talked to title organizations. We talked to many other organizations, and most of the time they don't actually have all the information. So do we want to hold up the land acquisition process? I don't know. I'd be willing to have that discussion some more. We've had discussions, but that was a decision we made to go after the fact. And in this is a reporting mechanism to the Attorney General. The Attorney General then investigates, and then if determined that they violated this law, then they would go into the civil asset forfeiture process. So I think we've tried to accomplish that. Going through everything, it does include, as was mentioned earlier, the question about retroactivity. That is one of the sticking points as we go through this. And you're going to hear that from some of the others that are going to come up. And I understand this does apply to all companies. And if they're already existing, then this law will apply to them too, and they would have to divest. What we don't know is what we don't know. We know about 3 companies. We don't know about the other companies that might be out there. So how do we deal with the unknowns as we go through this? I think it's just really important that we look at that. But again, we got to a point, we were at an impasse. So we agreed to this point, and then we agreed to disagree basically, but we've also agreed to continue to have more conversations as we go forward. I believe I've covered everything in here except one last thing. I told you this bill is one bill of many. So this morning we heard the bill on investments as it relates to our retirement funds and other funds and contracts. This bill is about land ownership, businesses. It also includes the mineral and the water rights. We have another bill in about drones. We heard that this morning talking about drone technology. That one has been submitted. We'll have some more discussions about that. We wanted to have something on critical infrastructure, but we decided to conduct a one-year war game or an off-session war game. And so there's a bill in about conducting a war game with the Pacific region. And then what would that impact be on our systems? What might we have to do? And then the report out of that will come back and say, these are the things we need to consider to do next year. So we're taking a very conservative, thoughtful process at getting after the critical infrastructure instead of just making blanket statements and running around and trying to replace stuff. The other thing that we weren't able to do is airspace management, because there's a debate about your airspace. How much do you own over your property? Where does it end? Where does it begin? What about recreational drones? What about commercial drones? This is coming. It's already here in many cases. You'll see in this whole approach, the idea is to take a conservative approach, be thoughtful about it, understand second and third order effects before we move forward. And then if we come up with something, on the residential piece, we'll come up with something. Other than that, again, our job here is we got to protect the future for America for future generations. With that, Mr. Chair, I'll stand for questions at the appropriate time.
Committee, are there any questions?
Yes, this is the appropriate time.
Representative Osmond.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you for your testimony. Was there a particular reason why you chose 150 square miles or 150 mile radius as opposed to the entirety of the state of Kansas? Because functionally, they're the exact same thing.
Functionally, they are. That wasn't going in position. The going in position was, this is about national security, focus around the military bases. And then when the 150 came in, it did functionally get the whole state, but that's how it got to that point. Okay.
And for the record, you did say that your number was much lower than 150.
It was, when I started out, yes, Mr. Chair. And by the way, also, if there's a military base in a neighboring state and that radius covers into the state of Kansas, that is also covered in this. So just that piece within the state of Kansas.
I'm just saying 150 miles. If there was a military base smack dab in the center of Kansas, 150 miles would cover 80 to 90% of Kansas.
Representative Williams.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So my main question has just a little side question with it, but the main question is how many locations in Kansas would fit the definition of military installment? But before you answer that question, I want to come back to the representative from Johnson County about NBAF, because we also have NIAR in Wichita that has probably close to 50% of their contracts with the Department of Defense. So with the definition that I see here in the bill, it says any agency, any federal or state agency that is critical to the safety and security of Kansas or United States. So under that definition, would either one or both of those apply? And if so, how many locations in Kansas would this definition fit?
Go ahead.
Okay, thanks, Mr. Chair. Do you want me to? I don't mind answering it. Ultimately, they're still covered under the 150-mile radius. So they're actually right next to military bases. So they're within miles of a military base. So they would be covered anyways. But yes, so they're covered.
And then to the number of installments, I guess you're looking at the major military bases. I don't know if there's anything else outside of that that would fit a federal or a key infrastructure.
Well, again, we didn't necessarily go down the key infrastructure, but the military bases, the one in Missouri would actually cover, but it's covered by Leavenworth itself. And Riley covers most of the other areas. But then once you count the National Guard facilities, that's the part that I don't have the answer for the numbers of facilities, but.
So all National Guards.
Yes.
That would be in the West too.
Right.
And as you already mentioned, utility infrastructure, that would have to be covered through a separate bill.
It's all covered, right?
But not in this bill.
It is covered.
The utility infrastructure?
All of it's covered underneath the 150-mile radius.
Under the 150,
right.
but not
right.
in itself.
Not specifically, no, right. We debated that to make it whether it's the critical infrastructure, but then we might talk, then you'd be talking different mileages. You talk different things because it's the threat on a wire, if you will, is different than the threat on the military base.
All
so
right.
that's why we stuck with the military base, because we wanted to make this about the national security aspect.
All right, great. Thank you for bringing this.
Representative Penn.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Leader, for being here today, and thank you for bringing this bill. I'm, as many of the members of the committee are, we're kind of keen on national security, and I'm seeing some things in the news that give me pause. But I wanted to go back to the Attorney General's testimony. I'm hoping that you saw it. He did read from it. He made mention that the solution, and I think this goes to one of the earlier members' questions, where you're banning large ownership by foreign individuals of land and everything. It says that, and I'll quote from him, the solution is to ban foreign ownership of large commercial properties, but allow for exceptions to be granted by bodies such as the Kansas Land Council. I guess this would be in alignment with a proposed amendment if one were to come. What do you see as the right way, if you're open to it, to try to alleviate that particular situation, like creating something either in the Kansas Land Council or in the AG's office that does, for lack of a better term, a taint team, if you will, that takes in the application, finds out second and third order what layers there are there, and then passes that through either approved or disapproved, something to that effect?
Yeah, great. Mr. Chair, that's a great question. Is it okay? Yeah. It's a great question. Here's the, we have been working with the Attorney General's office going through the process to come up with options as we go forward. Our decision as we started this thing was not to stop the process, because when we talked to the Farm Bureau and KLA, and many others, if you will, there was a lot of concern about stopping and slowing down the purchasing process of the land, right? And I know the Attorney General has talked about things about meeting on a very rapid basis. So I'm open to having discussions. The answer that I have for mine was right now what you see. But I am open to having the discussions with anybody about any of the amendments as we go forward. I recognize that there are some other ideas out here. This is a heavy bill. I get that. And understand we're going to have other ideas, and I'm open to having the discussion. We may not agree, and at the end of the day, that's okay.
Mm-hmm. And at the end of the day, it's no longer your bill; it's the Commerce Committee.
That's correct. That's right. We have this. Thank you, Mr. Chair, for reminding me to. At least this time you let me go more than a minute. I appreciate that. Thank you, sir.
And Mr. Chairman, if I may, there was a question that was asked, what is a taint team? I would encourage the members to look at filter team or the terms privilege team as well. Thank you.
So you said tank. Okay. Representative Probst.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Mr. Majority Leader, for coming in today. Well, a couple of things. You mentioned, I think there's been some conversation about Florida and Missouri and their restrictions. How are they? Florida and Missouri, we've talked about them. How big are their restrictions around military installations? Are they this large?
Yeah, they as I understand it, Missouri picked less. I think they may have picked 50, if I'm not mistaken. I don't remember Florida. We were looking at Florida's bill because they did go after the residential piece of this. And as you know, that was in the bill originally, but wanted to do it in the right way. And it just became really difficult from the residential perspective, especially when we're talking about students that are here from other countries, specifically from these countries. And we didn't want to do something inadvertent to mess a whole lot of stuff up. So.
As you know, this came through Ag last year, and I'm on that committee.
Right.
And I think in the conversation, does current law allow a foreign ownership of ag land? If I remember right, I think Kansas has a pretty robust corporate ownership law that prevents a number of corporate ownerships outside of the state from owning land or even being vertically integrated or anything.
Corporate, yeah. There is. But this one, we wanted to focus around the military bases and make sure nothing like that came about.
Well,
and part of this is too, if it's okay.
Please.
A lot of the other states, I've already mentioned 15 are enacting this. What we don't want to do is not have something in place and all of a sudden we became the area where everybody goes to and finds a loophole in the process. So it's not that you fully see the problem. There is a problem that could potentially exist, and this one is actually blocking that from becoming a problem.
That kind of leads into my third question. I'm struggling to wrap my mind around it, and if someone can help me understand it, I would appreciate it. Why a conversation about national security is happening at the state level. I know I've heard some of this testimony before, and I know that there are people that believe this is something that should be dealt with at the state level. No offense, I know a lot of people in this building. I don't know they're fully qualified to handle the nuance and the complexity of international geopolitical disagreements. So I wonder why in the Kansas legislature, we're having a conversation about doing just that when I'm not sure we're particularly qualified for that.
I just didn't know if you wanted Representative Sutton to answer that one because he raised his hand.
I think that might be who he was talking about.
I'm also talking about me. I want to be clear about that.
No, and that's a fair question. And that's why through this whole process, we've engaged with the national security construct, if you will, specifically out of the Fusion Center. They were the ones that came to us and asked us to do a lot of things. And in that process, we do have a role and responsibility in this. It's not solely ours, but it's not solely the federal government's either. And so that's why we've gone and trying to limit it to in the area that we're supposed to be within, not an area that goes well beyond what we should do. Again, trying to take a very realistic, conservative, focused approach to this process. That's a really good question, though.
Thank you for that. The research team just handed me a note that it looks like Florida's prohibition on military installation is 10 miles.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
Chairman Rogers.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for indulging me and letting me be a part of this exciting and robust committee, or august, whatever some of us may be. But I have a number of questions, but I think it's maybe for another day. But I appreciate having an open discussion, and I appreciate your frankness in having our discussions. And I'm sure we'll have some more. Um, Obviously, agriculture is probably where I put the stake down, and I want to continue to have that conversation. Um, Currently going on in Congress as part of the House working on trying to keep the government open and do some budget bills. One of those that made it in the agriculture bill is to try to strengthen CFIUS. And what that would add the ag secretary into that mold to be one of those kind of votes, if you will, and on the other, to keep agriculture more in. So I think that's there. But I guess for the committee too, there's two companies that have history, were born in U.S. companies. One fairly close, that was outside of Kansas City, AgriPro Seeds, which has a facility close to Fort Riley in Gary County. I don't have the exact percentage on me. We're still working on that number, but the majority, I believe, of hard red winter wheat seed is researched and grown that goes all over the country here in Junction City. It's owned by Syngenta now, but it was AgriPro. It was an American company for years. So not only jobs, but also they won't sell. They'll shut it down. I don't want to be the one to tell wheat farmers, sorry, we can't work on something that a company that has been nothing but a good corporate partner. The other one, two guys, father and son, Joseph Luter from Smithfield, West Virginia, started Smithfield Foods. And they have a big facility. You drive by on I-70. Between that and one in Wichita, just probably shy of 1,000 employees. They're good partners, good corporate citizens. They were bought by China. China bought Smithfield. And I just want to make sure as we go through this process that we don't have the unintended consequence. Firmly believe that safety in everything we do and to protect our citizens is important, but that we don't. I want a Kansas solution that doesn't just go to the TV cameras. I've seen a lot of states over the last year that run and do something for all the TV cameras, and their governor or whoever's leading that charge gets on TV. But is that really the Kansas solution? I think that's what we can bring is something that really does work for us because of our rich history in military as well, but that we don't have undue consequences for these companies that have been nothing but employ Kansans and have been corporate partners. Mr. Chairman, if I have others, but for now, I just want to make sure as we start this conversation that is the committee is aware of at least my concerns of good corporate partners here in the state of Kansas. Thank you.
Okay, Chairman. So go ahead, Chris. You can address that.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So we acknowledge that those are two companies out there, and there is another company too that's in question. And as we've gone through, and this has been the dilemma we have, we've come to a point. The chairman, through his leadership and working with all the agricultural groups, have worked on this bill and come to this point of a standstill. And now we're trying to figure out where to go from here. And actually, in this process, I've received, since we introduced the bill, there's been 6 different amendments that are offered in the process. And I'm sure there's a couple more that'll come after today. And I'm absolutely open-minded about that, as I promised the chairman I would be. And I think that's what's the value. And the Kansas solution is having the open dialogue, working our way through our differences and coming up with an area where we can make this thing work. And it's got to work within this national security apparatus. As was mentioned in an earlier meeting, sometimes when you're doing things for national security, it's going to hurt a little bit and it's going to cost a little bit. It doesn't mean I'm saying no to any of that stuff. I'm just saying it sometimes goes outside of those normal things that we would do. But in the interest of America and where we're trying to make sure we stay safe, we're going to have to look at that. But it is my commitment, Mr. Chair, to look at all the things and continue to work with the chairman of Ag and anybody else that's interested to go through that process. I just appreciate the time and the opportunity to talk to you today about this and defend the position.
All right, so we're going to move on to the next conferee in the interest of time. I'm not seeing any further questions anyway. And the chairman's concerns are legitimate, I believe, and I would be interested in finding out what some of these other states address those same concerns for these large companies that were U.S. owned, that employ a lot of citizens that are going through this same thing. So hopefully we'll learn from what they've done. We'll move on to the next proponent, Brian Kavanaugh, National Security Council. Good to see you again, sir.
Thank you. Good afternoon. Thank you, Chairman Terwater and Ranking Member Probst, and members of the committee for allowing me to appear before you today. For the record, my name is Brian Kavanaugh, and I'm a Senior Vice President for American Global Strategies, a consulting firm founded by the former National Security Advisor Robert O'Brien. And prior to joining American Global Strategies, I spent 12 years in the federal government, 9 of those years with the Department of Homeland Security and 3 years at the White House on the National Security Council as Special Assistant to the President for National Security Affairs and Senior Director for Resilience. China's strategic use of land acquisition poses a multifaceted threat to American national security, extending far beyond cyber vulnerabilities. By strategically positioning themselves across civilian infrastructure through land acquisitions, the Chinese Communist Party gains access to critical areas that are vital for functioning of our nation. This approach not only enhances their ability to gather intelligence, but also jeopardizes our food security by gaining control over agricultural land and its use. The CCP's land acquisition strategy is part of a broader asymmetric plan to exploit weaknesses in American infrastructure. Through these acquisitions, China aims to gain access to vulnerabilities and interconnectedness of our critical infrastructure, including agricultural assets, allowing them to manipulate and threaten these systems in time of conflict. This poses a direct threat to our national security as it provides China with the capability to wreak havoc and cause real-world harm to American citizens, our communities, and the economy. As a former Senior Director for Resilience on the National Security Council, I have firsthand experience in understanding and addressing these risks. The challenge lies in defending against adversaries who seek to exploit the openness of our society. While America's openness is a strength, it also presents vulnerabilities that can be exploited by hostile actors like China. And to one of the questions we mentioned, land acquisition, real estate purchase, I'd venture to have anyone in the room attempt to go buy land in China and see how that works out. One specific example has been the efforts of Chinese company to acquire land near sensitive military installations. While it's been prevented from doing so in at least 2 states, there is one actively pursuing deals in additional states. And both of these active pursuits include land acquisition near sensitive military installations and critical infrastructure nodes. The use of land acquisition for espionage then gets into like, how did we arrive at a number and what different number people use for miles from a military installation has to do with what's happening at that military installation and what signals intelligence available to collect on it. In 2018, just to give an example, I was overseeing the process of withdrawing from the Open Skies Treaty due to Russia's aggressive collection of data on civilian critical infrastructure, which is a tactic that's being mirrored by China. I'm not sure if anyone remembers the Cold War treaty where we would allow Soviet Union and Russian military jets to fly over U.S. airspace with data collection instruments. In exchange, we would fly our jets monitored by the Soviets or Russians with similar intelligence collection devices. And the entire purpose of that Cold War treaty was to stave off a nuclear war by allowing each side to see what the other side was doing. However, as we got into the 2000s, 2010s, the U.S. noticed a dramatic shift in collection. It was no longer military installations specifically, but now switching to civilian critical infrastructure and what those civilian infrastructures were supporting in terms of the military assets. So when you think of the February 2023 balloon incident, and certainly that balloon flew over military installations, but it was also gaining insights and information on the civilian critical infrastructure beneath it. So in closing, through the extensive network of land acquisition and strategic positioning across civilian infrastructure, the Chinese Communist Party has established a vast intelligence collection regime. However, that threat, as I'd mentioned, extends well beyond espionage. And I'd like to highlight that my former peers from the intelligence community, including the directors from the National Security Agency, the Federal Bureau of Investigation, and the Cybersecurity Infrastructure Security Agency, all noted that the intentions of the Chinese have shifted from that of an espionage collection resource to that of pre-positioning assets to attack or disrupt American society and life in the event of a conflict. And with that, I'm happy to answer any questions as it pertains to the national security aspect.
All right, committee. Any Representative Shu?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I gotta say, I take issue with your line about us trying to buy land in China. Like, that's what makes us us. That's what makes us not China. We're a country founded by immigrants. We're a country of immigrants. And then so, okay, China doesn't allow immigrants to buy land. Fine, that's what makes them the CCP and us America. But I do have an actual question about the bill. As a national security consultant, it's not in this bill, but it was alluded to earlier about creating a land council or something like that to determine who can and who can't potentially buy land if they are of a foreign principal. Would you have concerns about essentially lay people with no NSA clearance or any foreign international relations training at all being on this panel to determine who can and can't buy land?
So I think the panel, sorry, Mr. Chairman, thank you, Representative Shu. The panel can have access to information that can inform their decision-making. I don't think it's appropriate for me to second guess how the legislature may want to set up such a panel. As long as the access to information is made available to them to help inform that decision-making process, the insights is really in the intelligence of who's the entity looking to make the acquisition. I think, while I apologize that my point was offensive and maybe called a contrast and distinction between the United States and the People's Republic of China, the openness is what I was trying to underline there, is we are a very open society, and that is part of what makes us very strong and makes us very different. However, that openness is being actively sought to be exploited by our adversaries, whether that's through land acquisition or lawfare or economic warfare.
Any further questions? All right, seeing none. Thank you very much, sir.
Thank you.
For those left to testify, know that you'll be heard. We're going to get through the proponents here, and then when we get to opponents, anyone that cannot come back tomorrow would go first. But we will not interrupt anyone. We will not limit anyone. The ones that are here that can come back tomorrow will do so, and we will continue the hearing tomorrow just to make sure that everybody is heard in their entirety. So I know I see some of you guys out there squirming that we're running out of time. Pay no heed to that. Next up, Michael Lucci, State Armor Action.
Good afternoon. Thank you, Chairman Tarwater and Ranking Member Probst and members of the committee. My name is Michael Lucci, the founder and CEO of State Armor, and the purpose of State Armor is to provide state solutions to global security threats. So I'd like to start with acknowledging and maybe heightening the role of states against our current adversaries, because I think there have been some really thoughtful and introspective questions that have addressed this. I think that in our system of federalism, it's been noted that we're very open. This is very positive. We're also decentralized. This is also, I think, generally a good thing to let people work things out more locally. But this does result in a positive sense in states having really tremendous powers, especially if you compare them to subnational units of government in other countries. So this is a uniquely American thing. I'm very positive on it personally. I think that while states are very far from Washington, D.C., which is where our national security experts largely reside, with the power of states does come some responsibility to begin entering into some national security issues when it's important to do so. And I think that this is one of those times when it's important to do so. But let me give two specific examples. I'll refer to a deal that was underway in North Dakota last year near Grand Forks Air Force Base. This was for a company called Fufeng Group to set up shop right next to this very sensitive Air Force Base. And CFIUS, which is the Department of Treasury kind of piece of Department of Treasury that reviews these foreign investments in the United States, CFIUS actually waved their hands and said, we have no jurisdiction on this issue. After CFIUS waived jurisdiction, the state asked for the Air Force itself to weigh in, and the Air Force wrote a very clear, direct letter saying, CFIUS concluded it did not have jurisdiction, but the department's view is unambiguous. The proposed project represents a significant threat to national security with near and long-term risks to a significant impact to our operations in the area. And so with CFIUS sort of defining their jurisdiction to be as it is, in North Dakota, it was only the state government, and actually in that case, it actually came down to the local government that could protect that Air Force base from a project that the Air Force itself said is a significant national security threat. I would fully agree with the committee that this is not a perfect world, that the federal government probably ought to do more and do more quickly. But I would also argue that even if the federal government is acting perfectly, we want our states to have a robust role in protecting themselves because they are more nimble, they are more local, and they can be more responsive, as been described in this hearing, to creating a solution that works really well for Kansas, for Missouri, for Iowa, for whatever the state is. And so while I fully sympathize with the sentiment of the feds ought to be covering more of this, they really should. And they, early hearing today, DHS should probably be bringing information to states in some regular fashion to inform perspective and viewpoints on those issues. Nonetheless, I think it's important for states to be taking action. I'll give one other example where states, actually there was one state that got ahead of a problem. That problem is port cranes, ship-to-shore port cranes. And President Biden issued, I believe it's an executive order in the last couple of weeks, where he said, we're going to rip out all these port cranes that come from one Chinese company, and we're going to replace them with an American manufactured port crane. And there's kind of a 5-year timeline to phase this in. So there's a state that actually never allowed, is through local jurisdictions, they never allowed those port cranes to come in. But one of the most frightening statistics I just learned last week after the president's action was that the United States Navy vessels will not go near 80% of our own ports because of the espionage risk that these cranes present to our own Navy. So our own Navy has to avoid many of our own ports. Now, it is a fact that the Navy wouldn't be parking in some of these ports anyways. They couldn't, fit into these ports. But that is an example where, and I said, there is a state that ultimately deferred, a coastal state that deferred on using those port cranes. And so that state's ports are not presenting an espionage threat to our own Navy. There are a number of investments across the country. I think we've previously spoken about 130, 140,000 acre ranch on the border with Mexico and Texas near Laughlin Air Force Base that was purchased by a former general of the People's Liberation Army. The stated intention was to put up wind turbines, which of course would have tremendous surveillance capabilities near the border, near the Air Force Base. And then in Nebraska, Colorado, Wyoming, our nuclear silos are surrounded on all sides with telecommunications equipment from Huawei. Huawei is essentially banned in our country. They've been kicked out of the country, but the equipment's still there. They were kicked out because they're being used to spy, and they can intercept signals near our missile bases out there. I'll wrap up here with a quote from H.R. McMaster that I think frames the contest here and why America needs a whole of government response. On his visit to Beijing in November of 2017, he was the national security advisor at the time. They were meeting with all the higher ups in the Chinese government. They had a number of discussions, and then the man who's the premier of their government, essentially the number two, dismissed American concerns about trade practices, unfair economic practices, and then told the American team directly that the United States' role in the future global economy would be merely to provide China with raw materials, agricultural products, and energy to fuel China's production of the world's cutting-edge industrial and consumer products. And of course, the unspoken part, cutting-edge military technologies. This is one example of their openness in telling us what they intend to do with us over the long run. This is not the only example. There are examples on both sides of the party aisle where Americans have heard what they intend to do. And for that reason as well, it's very important for states to join with the federal government in protecting ourselves against this threat. Thank you. Happy to take any questions.
Committee, any questions? Representative Penn.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just wanted to ask a quick question, and it may be for yourself or Ms. Kavanaugh. We talk about the fierce urgency of now and how much of a threat this is on timeline. Could you say anything to that direction as far as the threat that we're facing with the accumulation of properties and things of that nature, proximities? We have some big things coming up with soccer. That's a big economic driver for Kansas. We also know, as we're talking about national security threats, how much of a timeline do we have before these things matriculate?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Representative. Like anyone, I'm not going to predict when, for example, China might make a move on Taiwan. I think that I could give clear examples of time urgency. I know that Kansas has some potential investments that speak to this issue. I think that the issue is not so much what is being purchased, but where it's being purchased. And so I know there's an issue in Kansas that you all are working through, but I'll give you an issue that we became aware of just through testifying in other states. The very same company, Fufeng Group, that North Dakota chased out of the state because the Air Force said they're a national security threat, they are right now about to ink a deal near one of 3 intermodal transportation locations in the United States of America to make a significant investment at that location. I expect that because we just learned about this, I expect that there's going to be news related to this coming out. But we are also aware of many other deals in many other locations. And we learn about this just because we come testify about a bill like this. And then, maybe an economic agency will say, if you pass this bill, then these deals aren't going to occur. And we look at the deals and we can't believe that these deals are being considered, like the one I just referred to now. So timing, I don't know. I mean, the FBI director, of course, is saying that there's this pre-positioning that's going on within malware for cyber attacks and things like this. Of course, physical proximity to the intermodal or to a military installation is very important if you want to disrupt those operations. And then, not to overemphasize the point, when we have a Navy that doesn't want to visit our own ports because the cranes are being used for potential espionage, and our Defense Intelligence Agency said those cranes could be remotely accessed. They said this in the Wall Street Journal, I think in the year 2020, 2021, there was an article about this. You could really kind of paint a picture of pre-positioning to be extraordinarily disruptive to our lives. And then you have to ask why. What are they aiming at? I would guess that the answer is, one, just normal coercion, like anyone wants to be able to coerce an adversary. But what specifically, it would probably be if they want to forcibly subjugate the free people of Taiwan, that they would want us to not be able to respond. Whether or not we should respond, that's somebody else's question. They just don't want us to have the choice.
subject of some major companies came up, Smithfield being one of them. Can you tell us how are some of the other states addressing that issue with that company?
Mr. Chair, with respect to Smithfield, which has operations, of course, in the Plains, and then I think, of course, in North Carolina. I'm not aware of any conversations in North Carolina, but their legislative session doesn't begin for another 6 weeks or so. And it's one of those shorter sessions, the interim sessions. Across the Plains, I think that some states, I don't want to be quoted on this, but I think I read that the Nebraska proposal would be more towards divestment. I'm not sure about Missouri. Missouri, it's kind of early in the process. And I don't know what other states they might be in, but those are states where I think that they might be located in those states where those proposals are at.
As you become apprised of that, could you please forward that to this committee?
Absolutely. I would note that Arkansas, which had Syngenta, did a divestment. That's kind of a different project than Smithfield has, but that was one state that acted on that type of project.
Okay, and then what is your single largest current concern with the state of Kansas?
For the state of Kansas, Mr. Chair, that's
other than our majority leader.
I think that's a challenging question for me to answer. I remain concerned, and this isn't so much Kansas, but Kansas does have this issue about this whole swath of the Great Plains, including almost all of the state of Nebraska, where the telecommunications provider is almost sole source Huawei equipment, including near the nuclear silos. That same provider has a big chunk of Kansas as well. And so the federal government has been, if they've been clear about anything, it's about Huawei being a big problem for us. And so the fact that that's out there is one thing. But to be candid, I'm not looking at a map of these different investments in Kansas, but anything that would be close to a sensitive military installation, including across the border where we run stealth bombers out of Missouri, those would be very concerning.
Okay, not seeing any other questions for you. Thanks again for your time.
Thank you.
All right, moving on. I have another proponent here, but I'm not sure is a proponent. Sean Montgomery, are you a proponent or an opponent? Opponent. Okay. Are there any other proponents here that wish to testify? Okay, seeing no proponents. No other proponents. There are several written testimonies in the S-Drive committee on both sides of the issue. We'll move on to the opponents, the ones we can get to today. So anyone that cannot come back tomorrow that's an opponent, raise your hand. All right. Randy, come on up.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Clearly, I can come back tomorrow, but we have with us today, out of a foreign to the state and the state of Kentucky, Todd Barlow with Syngenta proper. Would certainly like the committee to be able to hear from Mr. Barlow today while we have him.
Okay, come on.
Thank you.
Todd Barlow, right?
Yes, sir.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. Thanks for the opportunity to appear before you today. My name is Todd Barlow, and I am with Syngenta, which, of course, has been mentioned a couple of times today. So hopefully I can provide some information on our company and how this potential legislation would impact us, being House Bill 2766. Syngenta is a global company. We're based out of Basel, Switzerland, and have been there for well over 100 years as our headquarters here, and we employ 57,000 employees across the country and do business in about 100 countries across the world. Here in the U.S., which is what is of interest, I think, to all of us, our crop protection headquarters is located in Greensboro, North Carolina, and our global seeds business is located just outside of Chicago, Illinois. We're clearly the largest private wheat breeding company in the United States. And for nearly 20 years, Syngenta has operated an innovation center for our North American wheat breeding efforts in Kansas and for the Central Plains here in Junction, or close in Junction City, Kansas. This location is a key logistics hub for wheat breeding, nurseries, trialing, the development of hybrids and varieties, and particular to the winter wheat region. The research conducted at this location has produced market-leading wheat varieties for farmers in Kansas, but across the country as well. We have all sorts of scientific operations there that deliver superior wheat products for all classes of wheat in the United States. We're actually in the process, and in 2025 should be bringing really the first hybrid wheat to market in the year 2025. Our Junction City site also supports testing efforts for both corn and soybeans here in Kansas and for the western portion of the Corn Belt. At this site, we provide upwards of 10 seasonal opportunities and roles for high school and college students, as well as our numerous full-time employees. These internships help develop the skill set for these Kansas students who will be the future of agriculture, not only in Kansas, but across the country. Syngenta employs over 60 employees doing research, development, and sales work here in Kansas, of which the vast majority of all that research and work is here, stays in the U.S. to the benefit of both Kansas and U.S. farmers. Prior to Syngenta's purchase in 2017, the company submitted a request for clearance from the Committee on Foreign Investment in the United States, often referred to as CFIUS. CFIUS is an interagency committee chaired by the United States Department of Treasury that has the authority to review national security effects of any transaction that could result in foreign control of any U.S. business on covered real estate transactions and those that are located in proximity to ports or military or government installations. As part of the clearance process, Syngenta provided all information requested. Actually, we volunteered to come into that process, but we have provided all that information voluntarily to CFIUS. As a condition of entering of the acquisition of Syngenta, we entered into a national security agreement through CFIUS. The Department of Defense and the United States Department of Agriculture are the two permanent government agencies that are what are considered our monitoring agencies. And in that process, we were required to divest a number of real estate operations across the United States before we were allowed to be purchased. We have to comply with that NSA, and we take that very, very seriously. Syngenta was also, when we come through that process, we appointed a national security officer who's responsible for ensuring the company's compliance with the terms of the national security agreement, and we provide routine and periodic updates with regard to our facilities to those monitoring agencies. The CFIUS monitoring agencies that I mentioned earlier, they're the Treasury, the Department of Defense, and the USDA. Most recently conducted site visits at the company's crop protection headquarters and our primary seeds research site in North Carolina. So in essence, folks from the Department of Defense or from the United States Department of Agriculture or anyone from Treasury can walk into any of our facilities in the U.S. any day they want to, unannounced, can get on our computers, can inspect our operations, and we take that very seriously, and we think that is their right and should be in order to do that. Folks, we have a long history and proud history of serving U.S. farmers, including the great state of Kansas, those in the great state of Kansas. We take our national security obligations very seriously, and we'll continue to be among the most productive. We'll continue to help develop the most productive growers and products for growers in the U.S. Through our work at Syngenta. There's an amendment that I think many of you have heard of. There's a number of them, but with regard to what we would like to talk about here and finishing up would be Kansas ag retailers and a number of other agriculture organizations have brought some language forward that, in essence, we would ask that this committee consider. Without the consideration of that amendment For example, our facility here in Kansas would have to be divested, and we would lose the ability to research and bring those products to market. And so to us, that's very important, but I think it's also important to agriculture in general. Mr. Chairman, with that, I'll conclude and glad to take any questions you may have.
Committee, any questions? So, sir, could you tell me how many states are you not allowed in right now?
Arkansas would be the only state that that we've had to divest property in.
And how
we
many,
continue to do business in virtually every state.
Okay, so but there are other states that are considering divestation.
There are a few other states who are considering the action. There's probably right now, as of today, I probably have 40 bills in my states that would in some form or fashion deal with foreign ownership. Very few of them deal directly with divestiture. The majority of them are looking forward and would restrict us or a company like ours from the ability to develop or purchase new real estate, typically within 10 to 25 miles of military installations.
So as more and more of this pops up, there's got to be some sort of a overall future business plan that you're working on to try to figure out a way to keep working in the states, right? So as we move forward, there might be other options as well.
Absolutely. I think one thing I would say clearly, the ability to lease property in most states is not in play. Where in Kansas, for example, if this bill passed as it is, Syngenta would have to divest of that property. We would not have the option of leasing it back because that is considered in this bill. So there are options, but in Kansas with this bill, the way it is would be, I don't know of an option, quite frankly, in Kansas.
Okay.
With the passage of this bill.
All right. Yeah, but there are amendments in the works that you're working with leadership on.
Yes, sir.
Okay, good. Okay, I'm not seeing any further questions for you. Thank you very much. There was one other hand that was raised. Come on up, sir, and introduce yourself. Welcome to Commerce Committee.
Thank you. Mr. Chairman, members of the House Commerce Committee, my name is Sean Montgomery, and I'm president of Nano USA. Perhaps you've heard a few things about us recently. I'd also like to introduce a couple people that are with me today. Scott Murray, who is our head of operations, currently resides in Michigan, and Brent Dringenberg, who is our engineering manager, who's originally from Kansas. I was born in Ohio, currently live in Boston, and I'm happy to be standing before you today in Kansas, where Nano USA is building its headquarters and investing nearly $95 million into the local economy. Over the past 2 months, I've read a lot of misinformation about Nano in the press and on the internet. I watched the hearing in the Senate on Senate Bill 446, where several people attacked Nano and made some false claims. I've seen a lot of allegations that Nano is moving to town to steal military secrets and other accusations that bear absolutely no semblance to reality. So I'm here before you today to set the record straight, to answer any and all questions you may have publicly and address everybody's concern. I have nothing to hide, and we look forward to being part of the Kansas community. I have lived in the United States my entire life. I grew up in rural Ohio in an old steel mill town, and I'm very, very proud to be an American citizen. I absolutely share the same concerns as all of you regarding foreign actors that could be a threat to our economy, our security, our safety, and sincerely appreciate the Kansas legislation's efforts to protect those fundamental interests. But contrary to what's being portrayed, Nano poses absolutely no threat at any level. And the notion that Nano USA could be used as a conduit to steal America's military and intellectual secrets is completely incorrect. Yes, Nano USA's parent company is based in China. That is correct. But that is no different than several other large companies also here in Kansas. I would like to mention a few key points. Our parent company was originally started by 2 American and 1 Canadian venture capital firms. And when they debuted on the Shanghai Stock Exchange, they had to be listed as a foreign joint venture and not just purely a Chinese company. As president of Nano USA, I run the company. We're an independent division, and with Scott Murray, who I just introduced, we're the ones who made the decision to locate here in Kansas for lots of reasons that I'm happy to discuss. The only obligation I have to the China parent entity is to produce monthly financial reports to share with investors. They're a publicly traded company. I have to tell them how much money I've spent, where it's going. We plan to hire over 100 well-paid employees in Kansas with great benefits. I assure you, I would never do anything that isn't in the best interest of the United States, period. Not under my watch. We're actually bringing new technology to the US, not the other way around. It's not being stolen. All the technology was created in China. I want to bring it here. I would like to explain what Nano actually does and why our presence here is important, not just for the Kansas economy, but also for the American consumer and supply chain. Nano is the world's leader in making carbon nanotubes. I'm a chemist. I like to throw out terms. You may be asking, what is a carbon nanotube? It's a really small tube, think of it kind of like a paper towel tube, with a diameter of 5 to 10 nanometers. That's 150,000 times smaller than the width of a human hair. Why are they important? They are highly conductive. They're twice as conductive as copper and 10 to 100 times more conductive than the carbons that are used in lithium-ion batteries today. They are also some of the strongest materials known. I like to think of carbon nanotubes as high-tech soot. If you can picture the black toner in a toner cartridge, that's kind of what the powder looks like. We then take this powder and we mix it into a liquid. This is what we call our carbon nanotube paste, and this is what is used in lithium-ion batteries. Kind of picture it this way. Kids are coming in from playing outside on a hot day. They want a big glass of chocolate milk. Don't have any. So they go to the cupboard, grab the Nesquik, big scoop, put it into a glass of milk. And then they stir and they stir. If it's anything like I remember, and stir and stir and continue stirring. Nano's paste is similar to this, but we completely mix our high-tech soot into a liquid until it becomes pure and smooth, just like chocolate milk. And we do this better than anybody else and at a great price. We then sell this to the lithium-ion battery producers. Our customers here in America have been very happy with our paste. It's a crucial ingredient to help their batteries meet the high performance requirements by making them faster to charge, improving their efficiencies, and lasting longer. Just one important request. Even though we do compare it to chocolate milk, please don't try to drink it. Oh, and one last point, and this seems like a very valid one with a lot of the testimonies that were heard today, a lot of the concerns, which I also share. Our carbon nanotube paste, it has no electronics. It cannot listen to your conversations. It cannot download personal information from your phone. And it cannot hack your computer. It's just paste. We're building our plant here in Kansas for 2 big reasons. Kansas is centrally located here in the United States, and next to or in very easy shipping distance to most of our customers and our suppliers. Honestly, that was one of the big selling points when we came here talking to the commerce departments, centrally located, and it's 100% accurate. The second is that today, there are no companies in the US capable of filling the need of carbon nanotubes in terms of performance, price, and capacity. So we are creating a new domestic supply chain right here in Kansas with Kansas workers. In fact, our U.S. customers have been asking about a U.S. factory for several years. They are excited that we are building it here in the Sunflower State, and I get asked for progress reports all the time. By manufacturing in the U.S. and avoiding costly trade tariffs, we're helping to lower costs for our U.S. customers, and that will also save the American consumer money too. Since Nano first began construction last year, we've invested about $53 million, provided contractor jobs to 33 local companies and 162 individuals. When the plant is at full capacity, we'll create over 100 permanent jobs with an annual payroll of over $7 million. Up until a few weeks ago, everybody we spoke to throughout the state, from government officials to the construction workers that are on the floor building our building right now, and had a very warm reception. The latter of which especially enjoyed our holiday luncheon when we brought in some barbecue, and 40 of them attended, ate very well, and actually thanked us personally for having the luncheon over Christmas. It's disappointing how some negative and inaccurate press can so quickly misrepresent a situation. But we continue to be very excited to be here. We strive to be very good corporate citizens and engaged with the community. We will create good paying jobs. We may even sponsor a Little League team. I played Little League when I was a kid, so I'm actually kind of excited about that one. So we will be making carbon nanotubes and conductive pastes, and that's all we're going to be doing. Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, I'd be happy to give you and anyone else a tour of our facility at any point in time. Give me a call, anytime. Come down, show up, take a look around. Before I conclude, I want to address two specific concerns with legislation as currently drafted. First is Section 3A, which provides a 150-mile buffer zone around any military installation in the state or adjacent state. And that comprises the majority of Kansas, as there have been discussions about today. There's no precedent to support this 150-mile number. Florida passed perhaps the nation's most stringent bill. We talked about that earlier, 10-mile radius. Missouri's governor issued an executive order, 10-mile radius. Montana's bill simply states and references a direct line of sight to a military installation. The bill as currently drafted expands the radius from these military bases exponentially compared to other states. I would very respectfully suggest that you consider the following examples. We suggest you consider following the examples of these other states. The second and biggest concern with the legislation is that the forced divestiture of real property applies retroactively, not just prospectively. We respectively suggest that this, as it is currently drafted, appears unconstitutional, as it would require a state action impairing the obligation of current contracts. An easy way to remedy this constitutional challenge is to ensure the bill and its requirements only apply to real property acquired after enactment of Kansas legislation. I hope that I have helped to explain the actual facts, what we do, and how the accusations are off base. We are an independent operation, and we will maintain control of this operation in the U.S. All we do is make carbon nanotube pastes, or high-tech soot chocolate milk that I described. And we are bringing new technology, investment here to Kansas, as well as creating jobs. I greatly appreciate the opportunity to address your committee, Mr. Chairman. And I look forward to working with the Commerce Committee, leadership in both the House and Senate, and other key stakeholders to help craft a bill that is smart, fair, and reflective of the strong business climate that Kansas has to offer. Thank you for your time and attention, and I look forward to answering any and all questions you may have.
All right, thank you very much. Representative Clayton has a question.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. No, I just wanted to apologize for any ill treatment you received at the hands of the Senate. We don't claim them here in the House. We appreciate innovation and want to thank you for coming here today.
It's very much appreciated. Thank you.
Representative Penn.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for your testimony here today, sir. I appreciate you gracing us with your presence. And as I stated earlier, did a little bit of time in uniform dealing with national security, cyber comms, things of that nature. I really appreciate the company, Nano, I think you said, coming here and doing $53 million and 162 individuals and a lot of investment and everything like that. However, there was something that you just said that gave me a little chill. Your last statement, we are an independent operation and we will maintain control of this operation in the U.S. Quick question.
Yes, sir.
Nano Jiangsu operates, if I pronounce that correctly, a CCP party branch with more than 24 members and participates in CCP-backed initiatives, including Project 863 and the UWFD, which is the United Front Work Department. For Project 863, which has sent money to the parent company, Nano Jiangsu, it's been a major CCP initiative to advance China's military and civilian science technology. And according to a report from the Office of the Director of National Intelligence, it provides funding to clandestine acquirement of American technology, sensitive economic information. So I guess considering what you just said and what I've just read, which is the report that your parent company has members of the Chinese Communist Party, the CCP, as part of its leadership, can you confirm for this committee here today for Kansas, without qualification, without deviation, without any type of quibbling, that there is not anyone within Nano's parent company that's not a member or is a member of the CCP?
So I'd like to cover as far as CCP.
Because a lot of that's already reportable on your website.
Nano USA does not have any CCP members. When I had spoken that,
the question was
I'm
your parent company, not USA.
Yes, sir. Just to finish, Nano USA, it's run by me. It's an independent division. That's who is here in Kansas. In terms of Nano, my parent company, they have, it's either 23 or 26 party members in the company. The same thing is actually true for most businesses that are actually doing business in China. That includes Walmart and Ford both. Having a CCP party branch is very, very typical there. But yes, that is accurate, as well as it is accurate for Ford and it is accurate for Walmart.
Representative Williams.
Did you want me to, you had mentioned the 863 or UFW, did you want me
In
to?
the interest of time, we're gonna keep going. You can please submit that via writing.
I will do that.
Okay, thank you. So a couple things real quick. Whenever a company originates or is from China, the CCP owns at least 51% minimum. And so can you, number one, can you refuse to do something the CCP requires or asks of Nano USA?
Yes.
And okay, so then it was of your own choosing Nano USA to scrub your website of the things that were mentioned from the other representative. That was your decision, not the CCP's decision to scrub your website of any references to the programs that Representative Penn specified.
The Nano website that you're referencing is for the parent company. It's not for Nano USA. The 863 reference that was on there, I don't know why it was taken down, to be completely honest. And furthermore, I don't even know why it was there to begin with. 863 program, I did ask the parent company. I saw this come up. I saw a lot of concern. What is this about? The answer to it is Nano did not have a direct contract or project or anything with the 863 program. A project was given to a Shanghai university. If you want to know the name, I can get that for you. And what Nano did is they sold carbon nanotubes to the university. That's all they did. And the most important part of all of that, that happened in 2011 or 2012. That was a decade ago. So I come back to my first statement in terms of why it was there to begin with. It's a decade old. It's a decade-old project. Last comment on that is I represent Nano USA. We are an independent division. We're an independent operation.
Sir, what was it that attracted you to the site that you chose on the airport?
So really, as far as that particular site, so let's cover it from a high level. In terms of coming to Kansas, it goes back to what I had stated in my oral arguments. Centrally located, close to our customers, can't name who they are, I'm sure you can guess, and also close to different suppliers. There's some solvents that we use, there are other materials that we use, and it's close to them. At the point in time we did a site selection, we had looked at 2 different buildings. Started with 3, 1 was too small for what we were looking at, narrowed down to 2. The 2 buildings, and I can get you the information, but I think the second one was also relatively close to the one that we own right now. And honestly, this one ended up being a better deal in terms of what the cost per square foot was. So that was a financial decision as far as going there. Original decision, our customers, our suppliers, and we can ship to everybody very easily.
Then what was the total value of the incentive package that you received to be there?
That I don't know, but I can get you that information.
All right. Committee, any further questions? All right, seeing none, Randy, you can come back for your portion tomorrow. Okay, with that, we'll recess until tomorrow. Representative Croft, Majority Leader Croft.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm right here. I'm representative. You're good. I'm good. Hey, again, thank you. And I appreciate one thing I don't think we addressed as much. There is an incentives aspect in the bill. That was actually something that as we talked to a lot of local and to the executive branch, they asked for that in there. So just know that's in there. Take a look at it. The last thing is for those that are in the audience and the chair knows, we did this last time with occupational licensing. Until he tells me that he's going to run the bill, I'm going to have an open door. And if you want to come in and talk to me about amendment, come see me about it. And we will work. I'll work through it. I promise you I'll keep an open mind through this process as I've always done. But when the decision's made, that's what I want to bring back to the chair is the decision that we're going to go with, just like we did on the occupational licensing. With that, thank you, Mr. Chair.
Okay, with that being said, last time we did this with the Majority Leader representative at the time, it was a long time period. We even carried it forward for an extra year. We don't have the luxury of time on this. We are up against a wall on this. We've got a couple of weeks to figure this out. We will work this bill. And so if you have amendments, get with the Majority Leader to work with him. It will help you when it comes to delivering your amendment in this committee to have his support, or at least have run it by him and gotten to a better spot on your amendment. And we will work this. It will probably be in a week from tomorrow, but just know we will work it. We do plan to make sure that everybody's heard, but we don't have the time that we did last time. So don't take your time. Let's get it done. With that, we're recessed until tomorrow at 1:30, and we will take up the opponents.